people has become more and more a part of my life. It has sort of changed in my mind from the addressing of certain topics and the building of a talk around the theme to more just pointing and looking and saying, well, here we are, here's where we've arrived tonight. What is the situation? What is the state of the world? What is the state of the union? I think psychedelics had a very large impact. I'm sure there's no argument on this in the 1960s. But in a way, it was not ever anchored in anything. It was never explained to anybody, by anybody, how it fit into the historical context of what had preceded it. Perhaps because no one actually knew at that time. For instance, there was no, the invoking of shamanism as an explanation for how plant hallucinogens work on psyche is completely alien to the literature of the 1960s. It just isn't there. And speaking of aliens, the theme of alien intelligence or of hyperdimensional organized intellect contacted in the psychedelic state, that also was an absent theme. It was basically presented, the psychedelic experience was basically presented as an exploration of the contents of the personality with a little bit of overflow into aesthetic issues. So I remember in the early days we would stack our Abram books.
Welcome to the ZnZerna Music Hour.
And Piera della de
Tonight,
Francesca
we've got
Giotto.
something really special.
And the idea following out Huxley was that you would imbibe the meaning of these great works of art
an electromagnetic
behind the kind of psychic freedom that the psychedelic
generator
to graft on to your ordinary
Let me get the light up a little bit of this.
Well, I think all those kinds of metaphors were useful, but it's been now 20, 25 years of looking at that phenomenon and also of having the future continue to overtake us with ever more demands upon our cultural resourcefulness and our ability to cognize the cultural situation. And I think now it can be seen somewhat differently. And so these two nights in Los Angeles, which are called Understanding and Imagination in the Light of Nature, are a kind of effort to take several telescoping steps backwards and place the adventure of psychedelic self-exploration in context, to frame it in a number of different ways, because I think it's very important for us to know, as the Hermetic Mysteries urge us to know, whither we have come, where we are, who we are, and whence we are going. All issues that the psychedelic experience, especially in my mind the plant hallucinogens, bring into close focus. Here is an opportunity for a theater of cultural growth that is unparalleled. How did we find ourselves in this situation? What is exactly the nature of the cultural situation in which then the psychedelic response is called forth as part of a spectrum of cultural responses? Basically what's been going on in Western civilization for about 500 years is the exploration of the metaphor of materialism, which began as a simple limiting case. Since we're at the Philosophical Research Society, it behooves us to talk philosophy for a moment and remind you that there is what's called Occam's razor. William of
And you have
Ockham
to tune the
was
oscillators.
a late medieval philosopher, and his razor was that hypotheses should not be multiplied without necessity. Without necessity.
So I'm working with
In
that.
other words, the simplest explanation should be preferred in all cases. The fewest number of elements
And the
should be put
pulsar.
forward as necessary for
The
an
MPC
explanation.
here.
And following William of Ockham's
Off screen is an
statement
iPad.
of this notion as a
A
logical
sampler.
way,
And that's also what's running the Terrence
the
McKenna
assumption was
samples.
made
They're going through
then
this
a
delayed pedal here.
provisional assumption at the beginning that matter could be separated from the notion of soul and
Pulsar
spirit,
is running some drums
that
right
it
now.
could be
But also the
divided
MPC is
into
going to be
pieces.
handling some drums as well.
And out of the activity of those simple units, a model could be built up that would explain more complex phenomena in the world, Cartesian materialism, which was applied very successfully to
Okay.
physical matter, to the chemical element. And
Let's go,
so
C's
successfully,
features.
in fact,
I'm sure you can
that
hear
the
me now.
provisional nature of
Is the pulsar still way too loud?
was soon forgotten in the explanatory
might
zeal
touch it down,
of
but-
people who had latched onto this method. And so it was then applied out of the chemical realm, but moved into the biological realm. And the search was on for the biologically irreducible.
Oh yeah, I was also far away from
which,
the mic.
in
And
the
I'm going to be
17th
getting far away from the
century
mic
cells,
tonight
great
to play the
cycles
instrument.
cells.
I'm going to be
And then
switching
in the
between
20th
cameras.
century,
I've also
for
got our
first the
old
nucleus of the
favorite,
cell, then ultimately
Richmond Bridge.
DNA as the constituent of the nucleus, which
This
was
is the 9th Street Bridge here.
controlling protein synthesis. But strangely enough, the
Sun is setting,
elucidation of
maybe
mechanics of the
soon in
gene
Richmond.
through this program of reductionism
It's good
did
to
not
have you with me.
issue in the same kind of control
Drink drinks.
over the product of the gene that the same program had, the same kind of fruit that had been born in the analysis of physics.
We're also going to talk about this.
And in the early years of this century, when the effort
Because
was
right
made
now,
to extend the metaphor
the
into
array of
psychology,
magnets is being
the true
fed
inadequacy
through
of
my
this became
synthesizers,
clearly seen, so that
including
the
the
effort
pulsar.
to break the personality down
So,
into types
I'm using
or
a lot of my
complex
synthesizers set up
or
just to power all
archetypes
those oscillators.
or behavioral.
But this little guy is a
strategy
cheap oscillator. It doesn't
all
sound the best, but we're going to
fail.
be running it through a bunch
And
of
at the same
effects
time,
usually
this
anyway.
process of disconfirmation was happening in the social sciences. Physics, which had been old reliable in the matter of
I'm gonna show you some
supporting
tricks
this
that I've learned
particulate
on
point
these
of
electromagnet fields.
materialistic
And one of the cool
school of
things is that
explanation
if you
began,
have a
in fact,
system that already has some
training,
oscillators,
because the analysis of
that you can
matter
feed
was
5
pushed
volts out of,
to deeper and
you can
deeper
set one of these
levels
things up
until
yourself
finally
for like
phenomena
40 bucks.
began to be elucidated, which seemed incomprehensible in the mechanical
So,
model.
we're gonna go.
It seemed as though what had been thought of as points of matter were in fact spread through time, and the notion of simple location began to give way to talk of clouds of probability, this sort of thing. All of this reaching a culmination in
Cheers.
1923 with the Copenhagen Conference on Quantum Physics.
Welcome to the
where
ZnZerna Music
basically
Hour.
a new vision
I'm going to shut the
of
mic
matter
off in a minute.
And strangely enough, the new view of matter seemed to have a very mentalist sort of aura about it. It no longer was a theory of simple location, calculable energies, and specific predictions. It was probabilistic. Now this re-emergence of the need for a wave mechanical description of matter can, I think, now be seen from the vantage point of 55 years as the first stirring, or among the first stirring, of the re-emergence of the Spirit. And I think that what understanding and imagination in the light of nature argues
Okay, so this is super exciting
the
stuff.
presence and re-emergence of the awareness of the Spirit
These
in the
pickups
world.
are picking up the
This
coils,
is what the
energy,
so-called and
and I don't
long-heralded
even have to
paradigm
use
shift
the illuminator to
is
bump
all
up the
about.
energy.
It
So,
is
This is
a
freestanding. It
vast
doesn't require any translation
turning
of
over of the intellectual universe, which will eclipse many idea systems and support many more. It is the idea of field. Spirit need not be defined or even conceived in any sort of 19th century or mentalist or animist way. What spirit is a field of deployed energy that is somehow co-present at more than one point in space and time. It is the shadow that haunts the particularized world of Newtonian matter. And it is, strangely enough, the commonest object of spirit. In other words, as we move through our lives, as we project our hopes, as we plan our days, as we execute our jobs, we move in this realm of spirit. The problem is that we have been very slowly but very efficiently corralled inside an intellectual system which gives no credence to spirit, and therefore has had a curious effect on the validation that we give our own lives. For instance, if you look at positivist philosophy, which is the dominant philosophical paradigm in academic philosophy, there you learn that there are primary and secondary qualities to the world. And the primary qualities are charge, spin, angular momentum, velocity, this sort of thing. Things which nowhere come tangential to the felt world of the individual. Well, then there are also so-called secondary qualities. Color, taste, tone, feeling, all the things that make up the world that you and I experience. So somehow we are not traveling in first class on this metaphysical airliner. You know, we're back there with the secondary qualities, and the good stuff is all up front, and it is described and manipulated by incomprehensible equations, and you have to enter into a priesthood to become part of it. Well, it's to our credit, I think, that we are waking up, and one of the reasons that we are waking up is because into the object of common experience, by an exhaustive search of the object of common experience, diligent, clear thinking seekers, master understanding, people who are practicing who took seriously the constitutional assurance of the pursuit of happiness, have Robert Bork notwithstanding, have found more than the right of privacy in the Constitution, but have actually found the right to alter your own consciousness for purposes of personal growth. Well, consciousness is like a still pool. If it is unperturbed, it returns a clear image of the world, in the same way that the unperturbed surface of a pond will become a mirror to the environment around it. But if consciousness is perturbed by being shifted from its ordinary modality, then, and it's the extraordinarily tenuous and provisional nature of what we call reality swims into our ken. And we see, that what we take to be solid objects, what we take to be here and now, what we take to be personal identity versus other personalities, that all of these things hang by the most tenuous linguistic threads and cultural conventions, and that beneath the surface of those conventions is utter terra incognita, a no man's land, the unexplored territory behind cultural assumptions, suddenly, starkly, totally incontrovertibly illuminated the inspection of the individual. Well, this is feeding, indeed, to my mind, it is the major factor responsible for the re-emergence of the awareness of the spirit. It holds out the possibility that we can create a new definition of our own humanness, that it was fine for purposes of disentangling from the medieval church to take the materialist route and follow it into Darwinian evolution, to recognize our ascent from previous primate forms, and to sort of claim a dimension of existential freedom. But that is not the whole story. That essentially is the legacy or the achievement of modernism, which was fully worked out by 1927 or 8, I would say. I mean, those people, the pataphysicians, quantum physicists, the Dada, the realists, Alfred Jarry, Andre Breton, it was all worked out. And those of us who were born after that time and have come into this sort of pseudo-eschaton regurgitation of modern values in art, fashion, and literature have been living in this kind of a goldfish bowl ever since. I mean, really, it's astonishing the degree to which, in the most progressive and fascinating century in the last 10 or 20 for that matter, there has also been an extraordinary backward current of very strong recidivism that has held at bay the true exfoliation of what modernity was supposed to mean. That's why within the 20th century, the further back you go, the more utopian the projection of the future becomes. And the further into the 20th century you go, the more like a dystopia it becomes, as we get not elevated railways, immortality, and hot pants, but, bread lines and germ warfare and doublespeak and all of these things. So, into this situation of retrenchment and cultural recidivism and the working out of modern values, which are materialist values, comes then the beginning of the postmodern era. I prefer a different term, which I call compressionism. The compressionist era, which follows the modern era, and its theme is the reemergence of the presence of the spirit, and its major cultural exhibit, or the major cultural force driving it, is the discovery of relativism with regard to consciousness, which does not only mean psychedelic drugs and hallucinogenic plants per se, it also means media, it also means literary expectation, reorientation of the senses through design, urban planning, the entire spectrum of effects which feed consciousness back into itself is enunciating this theme of the emergent spirit. And it is not necessarily a welcome theme, because all institutions attain a certain momentum toward the preservation of their own definitions. And science, and the handmaiden of science, which is modern technocratic government, have created a number of cultural institutions that have a friction with the reemergence of the spirit. First and foremost is the notion of the public. The public is this weird idea that was generated in the wake of the printing press, that there were vast numbers of people who could be treated atomistically. They didn't have to be thought of as individuals. They could be thought of as various classes, masses of people to be manipulated. And if you could sell the public on the idea of democracy, which is another one of these atomistic notions. The notion of democracy is that for us all to get together and have it work, we have to assume that we're all alike. See? So we each have a vote, and then you may be tall, you may be short, you may be rich, you may be poor, you may be black, you may be white, but that doesn't matter. We'll give everybody that's charged one vote, and then we'll see how these populations work themselves out. What they don't tell you is that at the same time that you build this definition of citizen, you also build the institutions which subvert the citizen. So the citizen is not free to act
One thing
out
about
and
these
express
guys
the
is
wishes
you
of
have
the
to tune
citizen.
them.
The citizen is
So
a
I'm gonna check
consumer
this out
of
real quick.
ideological models that are sold to the citizen through agencies of mass propaganda. So there's this peculiar playing off of one against the other. In the meantime, what has also been happening is the institutions of language, which previously were pretty much left to develop on their own, and that was the situation well into the 19th century. Through the power of the printing press, the evolution of language also became something under the control of these institutions. And they very quickly have replaced whatever reality may have been impinging into the lives of the citizens with concepts. Concepts replace reality. You come into the world with a blank slate, and everything is what William James called a blooming, buzzing confusion. Well, then one by one, you isolate phenomena in this confusion, and you name it. Once a sector of reality has been named, it stays still. It ceases to behave the way it would behave for itself. It begins to behave syntactically, because it has been changed into a linguistic object. When things behave syntactically, they are either subjects or objects, or the syntactical machinery which relates these two together. In that case, materialism, dualism, projection of authenticity beyond the self are all reinforced. So these are the factors which have impeded the spirit into this psychedelic experience. It has a tremendous force to revivify the spirit, particularly because it is not an ideology. It is not something someone figured out. It is an experience. And this is important to bear in mind. It horrifies me, I'm sure you've heard me say it, to think of someone going from birth to the grave without ever coming tangential to the psychedelic experience. It's like going from the birth to the grave without ever discovering sex. It means that you died as a pre-adolescent. You know, you never really came into your birthright. And we have been infantilized by our cultural institutions to accept the notion of ourselves as citizens, consuming this regurgitated science and then handed down to us by the organs of mass culture. And this is supposed to be what we anchor our lives on. It's no wonder that drug abuse, child abuse, self-abuse is rampant in this society because it all has been taken away from us. You may read 1984 and think, well, thank God it isn't that bad yet. Well, the only difference between us and 1984 is we dress better. So I think that little gatherings like this, and I feel like this is definitely a family gathering, this meeting was sold out for other than Roy's show, small mailing is. So you are people who have very narrow filters. You stay up late. You listen to KPFK, and you tolerate Terrence McKenna. So you are either thrice blessed or thrice cursed. I don't know which it is. But anyway, it feels to me like a family gathering. It feels to me like we are figuring this out. And there aren't that many of us, I think. But what we understand as a group, what I imagine certainly understand, is that there is this twilight of reduction. There is this end of the old model. And yet we're not ready to proclaim the twilight of reductionism to simultaneously be the funeral of reason. See, there are a lot of people, a much larger group than we represent, who are prepared to bury reason along with reductionism. And I think reason may have been caught in bed with reductionism, but it may have been set up. The take that I have on it, and is, as they used to say in Watergate, linked but not tainted. So, I am a very, some people even that I was I was accused of being narrow-minded the other night, because I come to this very honestly through the science, through trying to really find out what's going on, and not just accept everything in downside. I mean, I don't believe anything if there's evidence self-consistent, if the case is well made. I mean, I think that the first thing, the truth will be, is a pleasure to hear, and not some turgid and tormented thing where you have to go to 6 meetings and not talk to anybody who doesn't believe in it, and all of this sort of thing. So I think it's important as what I call the archaic revival gets rolling. It is important for us to clarify where we are coming from. When we were simply the lunatic fringe of the lunatic fringe, it hardly mattered. But responsibility will devolve on us to say what we mean and to have a position which is not only convincing to the converted, but convincing to the skeptic. That's who I'm, future will not wait. I see the most crypto-fascist and intransigent of institutions slowly waking up to fairly basic facts, such as that a nuclear war is probably a bad investment. You know, so that even as Neanderthal type as President Pinocchio is willing, isn't that a cruel thing for me to say? Is waking up to the fact that it just don't pay. But you know, we have a lot of problems. It isn't going to be the millennium, even if we achieve a massive cutback in strategic weapons. There's still going to be propaganda,
There's definitely
sexism,
going to be
starvation,
some tuning going on
inability
in the next
to
couple of
correctly
minutes.
manage
That's okay.
resources.
Right.
These things will plague us unto
Cut to the bridge, then.
the last syllable of recorded time, unless we begin to undergo this kind of intellectual cohesion, the compression of our intent, the recognition of our group-mindedness as a feeling, as a will that can act in the historical context. And to my mind, the psychedelics have always been in the plan to promote precisely this. There were not language-using, tool-making tribes of human beings in the absence of hallucinogenic plants. The hallucinogenic plants create the context for integrated organizational activity. This has been going on for at least 15, 20,000 years. The problem is that through a series of factors, which we needn't go into in depth here, but factors which impinged on European civilization particularly, civilizations were able to evolve outside of the noetic input from Gaia, outside of the biological radio that envelops the planet and inputs into balanced tribal societies and functioning shamanic institutions. In Europe, somehow the chain was broken, the link back to the elder gods and goddesses and to the biological organization of human society before history was lost. And this curious kind of ungoverned intellectual development occurred, ungoverned in the literal sense of a machine which slips from the control of its governor. And in that situation, materialism, which is an insupportable philosophy actually, if you have an openness, a sensitivity, any kind of cultivated feminine response to nature, it is utterly impossible. Recall that the point of view of Cartesian materialism pushed Descartes to actually claiming in public debate that animals were machines. He said they feel nothing. The apparent display of pain is simply something which we project onto them, because we alone have a soul. And Descartes, you see, himself had not gone over completely to materialism. He believed there was a human soul, but it came tangential at only one point to the human body. Somewhere in the pineal gland there was a switch, and the soul was running things like a telephone switchboard operator there. Well, very shortly after Descartes, his followers just said, well, we don't need this soul concept. It's just a thing to stay on the right side of the church, and we don't need it, and they cut it loose. And well, once you cut that loose, then you have all kinds of permission. You have permission to rape and exploit nature, permission which had already been reinforced for Western man by the New Testament, but now raised to the nth degree by the assumption that nature is utterly without soul. And this philosophy persisted well into the 1950s. The essence of Jean-Paul Sartre's existentialism can be summed up in the statement, nature is mute. That was Sartre's position on nature. How many people thinking themselves existentialists and hanging out in coffee houses actually ever worked through what the consequences of the existential point of view was? Nature is not mute. You really have to have worked yourself into a weird place to believe that, you know? In fact, nature is entirely something else. Nature is communication, because nature is psyche. This is what we haven't understood. We have somehow talked ourselves into the belief that into the natural world of Eden, God came and made man, and from man woman, and that men and women are of so ontologically a different level than the rest of nature that no conclusion about us can be drawn from an examination of nature. Nothing could, it's impossible for me to understand how this idea persists and has such momentum in the 20th century, where hierarchy theory has very, very clearly explicated the notion of the linkage of higher order systems to subsystems that are physically more simple. So you see, really what we have is a kind of fractal universe. In fact, it's not greatly different from the alchemical view of the 16th century, where people said, as above, so below. The microcosm is a reflection of the macrocosm. What this is really saying is that at the level of a planet, you get a certain level of organization and spectrum of peripheral effects. The same thing,
Okay, that's without a
such as self-reflection, self-regulation, intent, goal projection, steering toward perceived goals. You get the same kind of thing on the level of society. It can be a beehive or a herd of antelope or whatever. And you get it in the human individual and the human society. So really what is to be seen is that we are the cutting edge of becoming. We are not a single part. We are a unique level of a multi-level organism. And we have been called forth out of nature, by nature, for a purpose. And what is our task as individuals is to discover what that purpose is, and then to align ourselves with it in a way which allows the plan, whatever it is, to most unfold. Well, what it seems to be is a progressive invocation of spirit, the theme with which I began the evening, that through language, through abstraction, through magical invocation, the formulation of religion, projection of art, the field phenomena, the phenomena which are diffuse in space and time and not easily located, are forcing or intruding their way into three-dimensional space and time. If you were an extraterrestrial in a starship or around this planet, what you would see looking down is a gene swarm. The species that seem to us to be animal forms extremely stable everything towards it, so that the progressive acceleration of human society, of information production, of communication, the proliferation of languages, natural and synthetic, all of these things are not something going on in the human domain and somehow sealed from the general state of nature, but are in fact part of the general state of nature. And the human experience, or the human animal, as the carrier of this catalytic process, this speeding up and accelerating process on the surface of the planet, is not sealed from nature, but the leading edge of a process on the planet. Now, teleology was so antithetical to 1985 because they were trying to pull away from the telos of medieval scholastic philosophy. They didn't want God, 19th century English, atheist, Darwin, Lyle, and that crowd. However, we have come through the so-called death of God and the elimination of a theological race of debtors for the universe. And now we're looking more at a telos which we would call operational, rather than defining based on ancient revelation. The previous method was the older the book, the truer it must be, and the Bible is the book, and therefore it must be true. This is what really are called the undoubted paradigm. We are overcoming that. It can now be seen that there is, in fact, some kind of transcendental object, and it's best to try and describe it phenomenologically. We don't know what it is, but we do know that it's an enormous attractor of some sort, and we are in the field of attraction, and by we I mean all life on the planet is being drawn into this nodal point, and it is possible to anticipate it through the psychedelic experience, because apparently the natural and the linguistic world are worlds which are organized along the principle of fractal curves. Fractal curves are recently discovered mathematical objects. Not all of them recently discovered. Some were known as late in the late 19th century, but most have been discovered using computers in the last 10 or 15 years. And they are self-similar curves such that when you take a subset of one of these mathematical objects, it is found to have the whole pattern embedded in it. Fourier transforms that describe holograms by these kinds of things, coastline, mountain ranges, data of all sorts in analyzing a certain way found to be fractal. Apparently, the world is a kind of vast spiral fractal that is achieving greater and greater closure with itself. And we experience this density of closure and this compressionism as the spectral effect which we call human evolution, human history, emergence of high technology, the present moment, the rush toward apocalypse. The most intense moments that the universe has ever known are the next 15 seconds. And beyond that lies still more intense moments. Novelty as a kind of generalized paradigm of the compression of connectedness throughout the cosmos is accelerating.
Oh, this is a fun one.
Moment
it's got no
moment
mutes,
in the rocks,
so I'm not
in
going to
the
be muting
trees,
stuff.
in the
And I'm
stars,
muting it, but I'm going to be playing some
in us.
track.
And so what we call history, which is not as modern, the modern theory of history is that it's what they call tremendously fluctuating. That's their model of the world. get order at the atomic level, order at the biological level, order. Suddenly you reach human beings, tremendously fluctuating. It's as though, we were Brownian and affected by the Brownian movement of random particles, and yet we somehow, out of all this ordering, we're to believe that then emerges the trendless fluctuation of human history. Actually, this is nonsense, simply that there has never been a thoroughgoing theory of history. However, now we are ready for it, because these wave mechanical ideas, the notions of closure, Sheldrake's idea about the presence of the past, the way in which the past drives the present, all of these things lay us open for an understanding of the compression and densification of time. And this is what is experienced in the psychedelic experience. Really, Whitehead said of Dove Gray that it haunts time like a ghost. Well, I think that the compression of the three-dimensional universe at the end of time haunts time like a ghost. It's the cosmic giggle. Here a messiah, there a shaman, there an ecstatic poet, and there the tiny ripple that is simply a congruent coincidence in the life of a single individual. Robert Anton Wilson called this the cosmic giggle. It's when something protrudes through the forward flowing momentum of rational casuistry and causes it to blow around it and eddy and churn, and then you see through for a moment, and you say, well, what is it? There was a plottedness for a moment. There was the hand of the maker there, but now I don't see it anymore. That is the going behind the veil. That is the seeing into the structure of being that lies behind the conventionalized languages. That's why coincidence is so often reported as an accompanying phenomenon for the psychedelic experience, because really syntax is dissolved, and syntax is a filter for this sense of eminent connectedness. And when the syntax goes, the eminent connectedness flows in. Then it's a question of what you do with it. If it causes you to believe that you are going to save the world, then you haven't gotten the message right. That's inflation. And inflation is very bad. It drives up interest rates. So if you get that kind of a take on it, you are misusing it. Nevertheless, the most advanced yogic techniques that are known are the techniques of the so-called Anusara Yoga Tantra and the Tantric yogic techniques. And there, the prescription is, it says in Herbert Gunter's Treasures of the Tibetan Middle Way, you should think of your house as a resplendent palace. Think of your utensils as made of beaten gold, and think of yourself as having a body made of living mercury. What this is in Western psychological terms is an invitation to inflation. But if it is approached with the right analysis of mind, basically that there is nothing but Bodhi mind and there is no particularization in time and space, then there is no inflationary feedback into the ego. And this is the kind of opportunity that the psychedelic opens up. It is, I said many times, quoting Plato, time is the moving image of eternity. Time is the moving image of eternity. What the shaman does, he or she leaves the mundane plane, and in Iliad's phrase, is able to trigger a rupture of plane. And the rupture of plane carries the shamanizing person into another dimension, literally another dimension. And in that other dimension, all of time and space is beheld, as James Joyce said, in a nutshell. And in the nutshell of time and space, everything is seen to be a part and a aesthetically integral, necessary part of the transcendental object. In fact, what this universe is a lower dimensional slice of that same transcendental object.
See why I like this shit so much.
I guess what impels my career and what I really can't get over is that what I'm saying to you is true. You know? That, I mean, we sit here, we gather here, and even though we're talking about this extremely far out thing, still all the forms are in place. I'm here, you're there, everybody sits on their ass, nobody sits on their head. It all appears fairly mundane. How can it be that what we are talking about is the nearby presence of an impossibly alien dimension? Now, if that alien dimension had been reported back to us by a robot probe dropped into the methane oceans of Europa, we would be all hot to go there, to organize a $20 billion expedition and a 15-year plan, and go out there and find out what is happening. The amazing thing is that, you know, each one of us in our own living room can be this Magellan, can penetrate into these dimensions. It really seems quite
Those of you who've been following for a while know that I'm a big one for dynamics. Dynamic control over an instrument's subtle muscle movements that translate to changes in the dynamic power of the instrument. And to make something like this, where very easy to translate dynamic control of these physical
we appear to be being pushed down
it just makes
a
me quiet.
featureless corridor toward a furnace. And yet, if you would notice, there are all these doors along the side
We'll go into the
of the so-called featureless corridor. And nobody seems to have cognized that you can just open these doors and walk through and short-circuit the inevitability of planetary disaster. Amazing. Amazing. Because we pride ourselves on our commitment that science allows us to look anywhere, inspect any possibility. Our models are not dictated to us by the church or by government or by industry, when in fact they are dictated to us by the church, government, industry, mammalian organization. And so we are no better off than all those benighted people in those previous ages where we look back upon them and say, well, they must have been so limited by their worldview because they didn't know about quantum physics and ketamine and Michael Jackson and cable TV and all of these things. But the fact of the matter is that unless we push through culture to nature, we too are doomed. We too are somehow being sold alive. And yet nature is there, outside of the cities. You know, you drive an hour and a half from where we're sitting and you're in the high desert, and it is demon-haunted Paleolithic space. It holds the same promise for us as moderns that it held for the Luiseno Indians who were initiated into their shamanic institution before the conquest, before history. So nature is the final arbiter of cultural form. This is what Taoism understood, and this is what I believe the psychedelic plant thing is pushing us toward. It was not immediately apparent that this was so, because as I said at the beginning of this talk, in the 60s, the psychedelics came out of the laboratory, and only the most scholarly of the trippers bothered to study the natural origins and the anthropological and ethnographic context in which these things were coming from, like the Eleusinian mysteries, or the Mexican morning glory mysteries, or the Wassa-discovered mushroom mysteries. But if we can somehow link a respect to nature, a sensitivity to Gaia, a valuing of ourselves, a complete placing of our own feelings and our own perceptions in the forefront of trustworthy sources, and the psychedelics integrated into our lives, then there will be a tremendous cultural impact, a tremendous reorientation, because the message that nature is trying to give, the steering signal on the human species, comes through the accessing of this shamanic dimension outside of history. The revolutions are made by tiny percentages of the population in which those revolutions are wrought. The important thing is clarity and connectedness, and a clear understanding of who one's antecedents are, what the source antecedents are, and what the target goal is. New Age is a pale label for what is going on. New Age sounds too much like New Nixon, New Reagan, New retreaded everything. What is happening is an archaic revival, a harking back to cultural models 10 to 25,000 years old, because the profane fall into history is actually ending. The way the fall into history ends is with the progeny of Adam, the human race, recovering the control of the human form, the control of the human soul, the ability to turn ourselves into whatever we wish to be. This comes through the union of imagination,
One more time on the course,
through
and then I guess I'll move
understanding
on.
into nature, the invocation of the dream. This is what the Australian Aboriginal Society is talking about. This is what the dream time is. And Finnegan's Wake says, up the end, prospector, you warp your woof and spread your wings, sprout all your worth. This up the end, this end of time, this birth into angelhood lies ahead of us, but it is really part of the archaic return to the paradisical mode before history. The psychedelic hallucinogens are the catalysts. The minds that they touch become the catalysts within the society in general, and from there, the fashions, the social forms, the kinds of conscientiousness, the innate decency that is called forth by the authenticity of the experience is what will transform us. I mean, in the same way that an affair can become a love affair if there is mutual authenticity of behavior rather than simply a kind of flirtation. In that same way, our affair with Gaia can be a love affair if we can summon to ourselves the vision to make it so. And it means really being aware of the vastness of the ocean, of the precipice that late 20th century historical human beings stand on. We are about to leave for the stars. This is what is happening on this planet. A species prepares to depart for the stars. To do that, energy has to be marshaled. The lessons of the long march out of the trees and to this moment have to be collated, sifted, refined, concentrated. That is the alchemical goal. The historical process is the story of a prodigal son, of a wandering and a return. The return is meaningless without the wandering. The wandering has no meaning unless its fruits are given birth after the return. 1,000 years has been the prodigal journey into matter, and it ends finally with modern pharmacology, modern ethnobotany, discovering in the jungles of the Amazon and the mountains of Mexico the body of Eros, Osiris, fallen since the time of the flood, but awaiting the re-emergence of the cosmos of human connection. That is what the archaic revival holds out. It's actually our salvation. I mean, I think I'm fairly hard-nosed. I don't see any hope for us. I don't see any hope for institutional transformation unless it is done with an awareness of the transcendental object. And the religions that we inherit from the past are so screwed up that the only way to validate and empower the transcendental object is by self-experience, by direct accessing. And people say, well, but can't it be done on the Nash? No, it can't be done on the Nash.
Let's check out
speaking, because if it could be, it would have been done. I mean, there are plenty of elder societies on this planet who have the rap down, But look at the kind of societies that they erect. I mean, horrifyingly dehumanized societies seem to be the breeding place of the most sublime religions there are. So, no, I think there has to be a humbling. We have to bow our heads and abandon the dualism that we inherit out of Christianity and science and the whole Judeo-Christian Islamic thing. We have to realize that it requires a symbiotic partnership. It's a hand-in-hand effort. And if we are willing to take the hand which nature offers in the strange form of the alien vegetation spirits of the stars that seem to infuse us on planet hallucinogens, then we will go forward into a brightening world. It's a partnership. It's a challenge. It's the only game in the planetary village. And I appreciate your letting me share with you my notion of it. Thank you. We're going to take about a 10 or 15 minute break, and then
we're going to take more than a 10 or 15 minute break.
There are a bunch of handouts, catalogs, events coming up, stuff on tables at the back of the room, which I urge you to take a look at.
All right, I gotta say, thank you to everybody supporting the channel, the YouTube, the music. Thank you. to my Digicat. To my Zerna cast, Erica Pontiac. Oh, this is shit. Ben Dasher, Kenny Creek, Gerard Stokes, Rain Cat, Sam Seeger, Austin Avalanche now. My Dusty Cats, Eric Akers, Visitor 10, Austin Cat, Wayne Anderson, Anna Cat, Jen Dudley, babe, what's up? Dog fuck. My Lumi Cat flying through. Last but not least, we got the mighty Barry Cat, Royal Blue. Nothing is true. Everything is permitted. Now that might be permitted. But it still might not sound good. So you might turn it off. Alright. So, that was a lot of fun for me. I hope you enjoyed it too. I'm going to be working more with this instrument, building some more of these oscillators to give it its own power, separate from the modular synth setup. I'm really enjoying playing with it, and I'll probably be making a YouTube video about how to build it. So, until next week what I think I'm going to be doing is going through a lot of old beats. I might be hooking up the instrument to play it along. But that's probably what's going to be happening. I hope y'all had a good time. Once again, this is the ZnZerna Music Hour, signing off. Have a good evening, and I'll see you next week.